Do we have everyone?
We're still waiting on a few more people, sir. Did Ortiz come in and I didn't see him? Hi, Aldo, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Okay. Hello, Horacio, can you hear us? You should be able to mute and unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. I think we're all here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the April 7th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Please note that this meeting is being attended by the Planning Commission and applicants via teleconference. We thank you for your patience as we navigate city business through this modified meeting process. For the benefit of the public and as required by the Brown Act, all voting will be by roll call. I will now call the meeting to order. Secretary Kamal, can I have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Spathopoulos is absent. Commissioner Ortiz?
Present.
Commissioner Montoya?
Present.
Vice Chair Owens?
Present.
And Chair Duarte.
Present. Okay. Now's the time for any Planning Commission announcements, requests for future agenda items, or conference meeting reports. Vice Chair Owens, do you have any?
I have none, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Commissioner Montoya?
No announcements for me. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ortiz?
None for me either. I just wanted to, I hope everybody had a good Easter with their family and loved ones.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now is the time for presentations. Community Development Director Schindler, are there any presentations tonight?
Hey, Chairman Duarte, no presentations tonight.
Okay. Community Development Director Schindler, are there any city council actions to report on?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Duarte. We had two actions at the last meeting. Our city council approved our second reading of our ordinance regarding the zone change for the industrial redevelopment of the site at 12021 Woodruff Avenue that was presented to the Planning Commission a couple months ago. And then I provided a presentation, specifically an update regarding the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus Sports Complex that I've let the Planning Commission know about as well. And that concludes my report on council action.
Okay, moving on to public hearings. Secretary, do we have proof of publication?
Yes, we do.
Director Schindler, can you introduce the staff person presenting this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Duarte. Just as a brief reminder, this is the formal action that we're going to be requesting of the Planning Commission tonight based on the mansionization study that we've been putting together over the last couple of years and the presentation that we provided at the last Planning Commission meeting. Tonight, our city planner, Crystal Landavazo, will be making the presentation. So with that, I invite Crystal to start her presentation.
Good evening, members of the commission. What we're going to do tonight for you, because it is a public hearing item, we do want to make sure if there is anyone new from the public watching that they have the advantage of seeing what is being taken action on, being presented to you for action tonight. So we do have John Kaliski, who provided our in-depth overview at the last meeting. He'll walk us through what the development standards are that we're proposing, and then I'll come back in after for you and again walk you through what the different sections are in the resolution, and that'll conclude our presentation. So for now, I'll hand it over to John Kaliski.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. And I think we have a presentation that will appear on the screen. Am I correct? Fantastic. We're here to talk about Downey R1 development standards and guidelines, proposed development standards and guidelines. And if you could go to the next page. As you know, based upon previous presentations that we've made to you, the city of Downey, the predominant land uses in the city of Downey are single family residences. It's something that folks in the community value with a tremendous sense of pride. What you're seeing on the diagrams to the left and right are the basic zoning parameters that shape these zones in the city of Downey. And what you can see from looking at these is that with a little bit of analysis that people are able to build very, very substantial additions. And the building of substantial additions and the building of new, larger single-family homes, at least in relationship to existing family homes, over the years has created a certain amount of comment and a certain amount of suggestion that there be reforms to ensure that new homes and additions to homes be designed in keeping with the scale and the character of the existing neighborhoods. Do you want to go to the next slide? There we go. Downey is also characterized by a series of styles of architecture that are fairly consistent throughout the city, the vast majority of which were built in the period from about 1935 to 1975 and include a tremendous amount of what are called minimal traditional homes, ranches and ranchettes and styled ranches. One of the major things that these designs are characterized is the prevailing one-story character. And that as well was something that was very important to a lot of the people who brought these issues to the city several years ago. Do you want to go to the next one? As part of this process, which we started in 2018, we basically did a series of public meetings working with staff. We've had 3 community meetings over the course of 3 years. And in going to those meetings, there were a series of issues that the community presented us in terms of character, the size of new construction, development of subdivisions on larger parcels within the neighborhoods, second stories looming over first stories, and consequent privacy concerns. And then the fact that subdivisions and private streets being built within the neighborhoods oftentimes did not seem as if they had the character of the neighborhoods. There were some other issues that were brought up as well that were either beyond the scope of the study that we were looking at, or were just brought up with less frequency than the design issues that are in bold here. Do you want to go to the next one? In response to these issues and working with staff, we've developed draft standards and guidelines for consideration by the Planning Commission and potentially also the City Council. And I'm going to try to provide you a few highlights of those right now. Do you want to go to the next one? The main and probably most significant proposal that we are bringing forward to you is to reduce the single family baseline floor area ratio, or FAR, from 0.6 to 0.45, and to modify the floor area definition to include mezzanines and enclosed patios, but excluding garages and carports and open patios. The two diagrams that you basically see here both basically represent what is able to be built if you were to still have a 0.45 FAR. And what you can see by looking at these diagrams, that you would be able to still build a fairly robust two-story structure and provide for accessory structures or dwelling units in rear yards. Do you want to go to the next one? In sort of consequential to that, or in parallel to that, we're also proposing that the maximum lot coverage of a single family residence not exceed 45% of the lot area. This would allow for fairly substantial one-story buildings to still be built with smaller two-story additions if they wanted to exploit the full 45% FAR, 0.45 FAR. What this would accomplish, it would better maintain relationships of open space in relationship to buildings, and would allow for new buildings to still be 2 stories, but to be more in keeping with the prevailing 1-story scale that's seen throughout most of the neighborhoods in the city. Do you want to go to the next one? We're also proposing that the first-story side yard setbacks be modified. Presently, there is an existing side yard setback requirement that's 5 feet. We would propose that the side yard be 10% of the lot width. So on a typical lot, and most of your lots are at 50 and 60 feet in width, you would be at either 5 feet or 6 foot side yards, which is very similar to what exists now. But on larger lots, of which there are larger lots on which fairly large houses have been built, the side yards would increase, but they would never need to be more than 14 feet on very, very large lots. Do you want to go? That would allow a lot more landscaping and buffering with landscaping and increase privacy between these larger homes and smaller homes that might be adjacent or abutting. Do you want to go to the next one? We're also proposing that second stories be modulated along front and side yards. This evolves a current standard that requires that there be a 5 foot step back when the second story exceeds 40% of the length of the first story. It takes that standard and extends it to the second story along the side yards, setting back windows that overlook side yards 5 feet further from the side yards, allowing a little bit more light, air, and privacy between adjoining homes. Do you want to go to the next one? One of the things that we heard a lot about in the public meetings that we attended were people telling us that they felt that a lot of the newer houses were out of character because they had very, very large 2-story elements that were associated with entries or bays. And so one of the things that we're proposing is that there be additional porch design standards that would limit the height of porches to about a total of 16 feet. So in essence, these types of elements would always be lower than the main roof line and would always be minor elements in terms of massing and bulk in comparison to the massing and bulk of the house or the residence as a whole. And the slope and pitch of the roof would need to be the same as the slope and pitch of the roof of the main structure, creating a somewhat more harmonious relationship. Do you want to go to the next one? We're also suggesting that garages be set back 5 feet from the main facade of the house or from the front setback. and that if there is an ability to provide, because the lot is wider, a wider garage, that it be limited to a maximum of 36 feet or 45% of the lot, whichever is less. This is to ensure that new homes basically still have a friendly look to the sidewalk in keeping with existing homes, and that garages don't dominate the front yard streetscape. Do you want to go to the next one? Subdivisions, as I mentioned earlier, was an issue that a lot of people commented on. We worked extensively with staff on this issue. I think what we're mainly proposing in terms of the standards recommendations is that certain types of neighborhood compatibility standards that are quantifiable be introduced into the code that help make the subdivisions more similar to the existing and prevailing streetscapes. So these would require that front doors face the sidewalks, that if there are private streets within the subdivisions, they be designed with trees, sidewalks, and parallel parking that would make them more like the existing streets that run through these neighborhoods. Do you want to go to the next one? We're also proposing that the off-street parking requirements be adjusted so that they're consistent with the 0.45 FAR. This is really a technical adjustment, just so that people don't get caught having to build more garage as the overall number or size of the homes in terms of the maximum size of the homes is reduced a bit. Do you want to go to the next one? We're proposing that additional landscape standards be introduced. This is really to encourage the planting of an additional tree at front yards, an additional tree at rear yards. This will obviously mitigate the urban heat island effect, but also it will improve the city's overall urban forest. But mainly what it does is it provides for vertical landscaping elements that further buffer, screen, and create softer transitions between buildings and their surrounds. Do you want to go to the next one? And finally, we're proposing what we call 360-degree architecture, that regardless of the type of house people build, that the detail and character that is introduced with the architecture be carried through to all elements of the architecture, front, side, and back. This is particularly important when you start seeing some additional two-story additions, so that as people see these higher buildings, they have maintained the quality on all sides of the building. Do you want to go to the next one? We are also proposing, and hopefully you see in your packet, the introduction and utilization of design guidelines. Design guidelines are being introduced in order to serve as an educational guide for people who want to build additions and new construction in Downey, to point them towards the various character types of buildings that have been built within the city and give them pointers as to how those can basically be continued. But at the same time, we're also providing what I would describe as overarching principles of what constitutes Downey character, so that if somebody wanted to build in a style of architecture that was not one of the traditional styles, that they can do so. As part of the design guidelines, the other reason we're introducing the design guidelines is to create a consistent means of review, so that when staff works with the Downey public, they're giving the same message much more consistently to the public. One of the complaints that we heard from folks was that some staff members interpreted the types of improvements that were required differently than others, and they wanted more clarity and consistency. This will help provide this, and it can serve not only as a tool for applicants, but as a tool for staff to help them provide for better design review. And then finally, what these design guidelines do is they have a checklist associated with them. They've been written so to the maximum extent feasible, they're quantifiable in a yes or no format. And applicants don't need to meet absolutely every one of these guidelines, but if it creates a tool whereby staff can determine compliance with overarching character guidelines for the city and further maintain and improve upon the wonderful quality and character of the neighborhoods that exist here. Do you want to go to the next one? And that's my presentation. And after the presentation, I'm happy to participate in answering any questions. And I'm here with my colleague, Ariel Brenner, who did a lot of this work. And we thank you very much to allow us to do this project.
Thank you, John. Okay, so then before you tonight, we are asking that the Planning Commission take action on the proposal in front of you. The resolution that was included in your packet and that we're asking you to take action on tonight is a recommendation to the City Council to approve the proposed amendments. As an overview for the Commission, sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 provide amendments to the definitions and figures in the existing zoning code that would be affected by the proposed design guidelines and the new updates that are being presented before you tonight. Sections 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 provide amended language to the development standards, the landscaping requirements, projections, and accessory structure standards in the R1 zone. These again would reflect the 360-degree architecture, the change to the setbacks that are being proposed, and again, the height and modulation requirements that we did find were necessary through the outreach to the public. Sections 17, 18, and 19 would amend the parking standards, again in reference to the layout and design of the garage as was described in the presentation you just heard. Sections 20 and 21 would amend and add an appeal process in regard to somebody who is trying to go through the design guideline process. They are looking for an alternative. There is a process that's built in there for them. Again, all of this was done to facilitate and make a much easier process for residents and architects who are adding on or building new within the R1 residential zone. Sections 22 and 23 of the resolution provide the amended subdivision requirements that was described by John to identify again that any private roads for a new subdivision would be required to be built at grade and designed to match the surrounding streetscapes that are around them. Also, it would require that all of the front doors and lots be oriented where possible to the public street, again, to keep the natural neighborhood requirement. The design guidelines that were presented at the end of John's presentation were included as Exhibit D to your packet for tonight's agenda. And this again would be included and referenced through different references in the amended language and the previous sections that were noted, so that anyone coming to the counter would have an easier process. They would have essentially a roadmap as to how to pick their architectural style, how to pick an alternative style, and check off the items that are required in order to get through that process easier. So again, all of these items were done to expedite the process, to educate the public a little bit more as to what the city is looking for, what the goals are. And that is what's being presented for you tonight for action. Staff is available for any questions.
Thank you, Crystal. I'll take turns asking each commissioner if he has questions for the staff. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. So thank you, Chair. I'm one of the new commissioners here, and I took the opportunity last meeting to get a little more understanding of what was presented to the commissioners previously. And I do have one question that I just wanted to hear, and that's, have any of you seen any other cities reduce the FAR and how that has impacted their development of their homes?
I apologize. We have not in recent years seen reductions of FARs, but what was presented to the Planning Commission at the last workshop is that the reduced FAR is consistent with most of the surrounding communities. So we wanted to do something that, again, wouldn't be restrictive. Also, changing the definition of the FAR, the floor area ratio, allowed for additional flexibility, where previously our code required that garages be included into the FAR definition. By removing garages from that definition, it actually allowed for additional flexibility in how they're able to use habitable space. So now we're only counting spaces that are being used and lived in, as opposed to just storage areas or vehicle storage areas.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
John, did you have a comment?
Yes, we've worked on 4 projects that are pretty much exactly the same scope in City of Los Angeles, City of Culver City, City of Burbank. Actually, that's 3. You're the 4th. In all of those cases, FAR was recommended to be reduced. And in City of Los Angeles, City of Culver City, and City of Burbank, in their various mansionization ordinances, have all reduced the FAR.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Montoya, do you have any questions?
I have no additional questions. Everything that I had mentioned was answered at our previous meeting. So no questions for me, Chairman.
Thank you. Vice Chair Owens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to John for just a quick second. So John, with your last comments about LA, Burbank, and so on, Culver City, favorable outcome. Obviously, the reduction in the FAR provided what that community was seeking as the outcome.
I would say that there were a lot of predictions of doom in the City of Los Angeles, which obviously is the elephant in the room. And I've been that the mansionization ordinance in Los Angeles, I believe, was passed in 2017, and there's been very little blowback to it.
Thank you.
And Culver City, where we wrote the ordinance, you know, I don't want to toot my own horn, but the reality is there's been no blowback and people have been generally enthusiastic. And the other reality is yes, of course, there are some people who do come forward and say they're disappointed. But the vast majority of folks in those cities have been comfortable with it. So
the whole formula, the outreach, all the behind the scenes, all the heavy lifting, the outreach that was done with the community spoke. Although not everyone was happy in the end, the majority felt they were listened to and are going to gain a better outcome, I guess.
At the meetings that we helped organize in Downey, the vast majority of people felt that the reduction in FAR was important. There were, of course, people who had an alternative point of view and disagreed with it, but they never really constituted in any way anything more than a strong voices who had heartfelt opinions, but they were very much the minority of folks that we were exposed to.
All right, great, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all my question.
All right, thank you. I just have one follow-up for John in terms of the pink house I think I spoke of last time with the color palettes. Is that included in the amendment?
We've not included, we did hear your comment. I think there are approaches that could be taken to address that, but we've not at this point made any substantive changes to the guidelines, and we would look to staff to provide that direction based upon the direction that the city ultimately provides.
Thanks, John. Chair Duarte, to echo John's sentiment, that you were heard loud and clear. If it's the desire of the Planning Commission tonight to move in that direction, we're prepared to insert language, much like we do on conditions of approval for CUPs when we go back and forth. So that's something that the commission needs to chat about. Our sentiments haven't changed, based on the anecdotal information that we provided at the last meeting. So once again, we'll follow your lead.
Thank you. Okay, before we begin the public hearing, I'd like to remind members of the public participating telephonically that the city's meeting rules contained in the Downey Municipal Code prohibit any conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting, even if you're participating telephonically. Each speaker shall have 3 minutes to address the commission. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding the public hearing for item PLN-18-00106 only may now call our teleconference line at 562-299-6622. For those who submitted comments via email, your comments will be read into the record and no further public comments via teleconference will be permitted. I will now open the public hearing. Secretary Kavanaugh, may I have the first speaker on the phone?
Chair Duarte, there are no calls for public comment nor emails.
Okay. So I will now close the public hearing. Now we'll take turns. We'll deliberate, and I'll take turns asking each commissioner if he has any comments. Vice Chair Owens.
Sure, Mr. Chair, thank you. So first I want to thank John and his team, excellent and a long-term project, but it deserved the attention given, as well as thank the city and city staff and the residents that came out and gave opinion and gave direction. I support these changes. It's a long time coming. I think based on what we've all been privileged to be presented, it had to go like this. We didn't have conformity, or we didn't have boundaries, if you will. Enough boundaries, but maybe not enough boundaries. To your question on the pink house, we'll get to that in further discussion, but that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Montoya.
Thank you, Chairman. I know that the issue of mansionization has been a hot topic for the past few years. So, same as Commissioner Owens, I'm happy to support these changes. And I also want to thank John and his team, as well as our Planning Commission staff who worked hard on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz.
I want to echo with the other commissioners the hard work that has been put in to this finding. My concern was dropping the FRs dramatically, and that's why I asked if there was any pushback from the other places that reduced the FAR, but they took away my concern. So I want to thank everybody who's been part in this new resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in my comments, echo everybody else's. I think the only thing I needed to add was, I'd like to see a color palette suggestion for people. But that's something that we could agree with or not to add. If not, if we have a motion in a second, we can go that way. It really depends on what you guys want to do.
Mr. Chair, if I may, sure. I think add, that piece in there about a color palette that's, not too extreme. I think that's important as well. I certainly appreciate people's liberties. This is my home, my property. I'll do pretty much that I want until they move in next to you, right? Or vice versa. You take, your lifestyle and what it means to you and move into next to someone else. So I think it's a good idea. Again, it gives a boundary, I think generally going forward, it's case by case. People will come and they'll ask for variances, and they'll, the applicants will ask for variances. City staff will come to us, with their request and work it along, to make everybody happy. So, but initially, yeah, I think we should add something basic, if you will. So create the language.
Yeah, if we get some direction from staff on that, in terms of how adding that to the amendment.
Chair Duarte, if I may, respectfully, can we hear from the other two commissioners in terms of their opinion on that topic?
Commissioner Ortiz?
I would second that. I honestly don't want to see a pink house. And so I'm on board with putting some language into the resolution.
Commissioner Montoya.
I'll be a little honest. I don't fall on either side of the issue. However, I would love to kind of maybe have a little bit more discussion on what colors would be allowable. That would make me feel a lot more comfortable in a decision for what we put down as an amendment.
Sure. I'll hand it over to Crystal. I think she might have some language. I would just flip-flop Commissioner Montoya's direction, in that it's easier to talk about the colors you don't want versus the colors you want, because I think it's a shorter list in terms of the ones that you don't want. But with that, Crystal or John, I think Crystal, you're the lead in terms of some sample language that we have.
Sure. So again, we did hear the commissioner's suggestion at the last meeting. And so John and I did discuss the potential of utilizing color palettes. It's not something that we would add in there tonight as a condition to the resolution. One of the suggestions, and we were going to seek guidance from the commission if this item did come up again, which is why it wasn't part of your amendment in the packet. So there's essentially the option that we were looking at is putting into the design guidelines, again, because that's not codified, it's adopted by reference. So it's able to be amended and updated as needed. So adding in to that checklist, another checklist item that says that they have to follow the suggested color palette for that particular architectural style. And we would work with John to provide that color palette. And so in the staff report presented to the city council, we would highlight that this was the concern of the planning commission and would highlight the additional checklist item that was added along with samples of the color palettes. That is one of the items that was our resolution to adding this in there, and it's an easy incorporation. The question and the guidance that we would need from the planning commission is if that would be one of the required items that they utilize one of the color palettes that are suggested, colors suggested in the palettes, or if it's just another optional item that they're encouraged to follow but not required to follow. I think from what I'm hearing, we want that to be a required item, that they select a color from the approved palette, but we just wanted to get that confirmation from the commission.
Okay. Commissioners, Commissioner Owens, you think we should do that as a requirement or a suggestion?
So I like what Aldo had said a few minutes ago about creating a list of the colors we don't want, because the colors that we do want can be, anything and everything that any of us think, are pleasing at the end of the day. So on this question, though, it's a tough one. So I think I would like truly for the applicant to propose the colors at us and us to say yes or no, or check the box that it fits in the range, instead of us coming up with 10 different colors, 15 different colors, and no others unless requested. I don't know. This is difficult.
Sure, Mr. Chair, if I may provide additional guidance in that. So what we would do is, again, we would work with John to find appropriate color palettes for each different architectural style. And we would not limit to only, say, the 10 or 20 colors within that palette, but it would have to be within that range. So we can provide language in the guidelines to say that it has to be within that range. If it's, different manufacturer, similar color, as long as it's not, if we have earth tones and then they go with a purple color or bright purple color, then that language we can craft into the guidelines itself.
Yeah, I think kind of my sentiments with Commissioner Owens when I say it's difficult if we just said colors, because there's so many different variations of colors. Mm-hmm. So I don't, what's hot pink or, whatever it is, it's just kind of, they would think it'd be I think it's more difficult that way. Commissioner Montoya, how did you feel about that?
I'd feel a little bit better about that. I mean, I think for me, it's just the not having that confusion. So as Crystal was saying, if there's a range provided, that makes me feel a little bit better about understanding, because I know I only know 10 colors like red, orange, yellow, green, blue. So if I can understand it, then, I'm comfortable with other people understanding.
Commissioner Ortiz?
I think I'll be more comfortable with having suggestions brought to us. So I agree with what Owens and you have said.
Commissioners, if I may, are you suggesting that when there's a project that requires planning commission review, that the color be included? Or are you suggesting that you would like to see what that color palette is per architectural design before you vote on these design guidelines tonight. Because what I envision based on what we're presenting is you have a sphere of colors. You know, I think most of us have been to Home Depot and you go to the paint department and you see all the swath of the color range from you know, the different hues from light to dark. And so what I hear that we're envisioning is, you know, we would have a condensed version of that for each different types of architectural design. So for instance, you know, the easiest is Spanish. You know, you'll drive by and see a home with Spanish architecture, and you never see those colors very much, you know, outside of the whitest, you know, white hues that are there. And so that spectrum of color would probably be very small. Craftsman may lend itself also to a specific color palette as well. You know, contemporary might get a little different as well. So yeah, I just kind of want to flesh out what the commissioners are requesting.
So I'll make comment here. So although I like that suggestion, you know, maybe we can't move completely with the total package tonight and take that suggestion, get that range of colors, and then come back to us and approve this as a whole matter.
Yeah, and I, you know, staff may be cringing, but and the reason I'm you know, sticking my head out here is it seems trivial, but it is going to be a big talking point. It's kind of low-hanging fruit. You know, you talk to applicants at the counter, and they kind of tend to get lost when you start to talk about architectural design and all the different attributes of a home and the setbacks and so forth. Staff do it for a living. John's an expert in it, but you got a contractor or even designer that, you know, isn't an architect. You know, they start to get into uncharted waters quickly. But you talk about color, and damn, we're all experts, you know, in terms of, you know, what we see, what we like, and what we don't like. So I want to make sure we flesh this out with the commission and we're comfortable, because, you know, and I'm going to be very candid with the commission, the council will talk about it and they'll want to know exactly what the commission was thinking, because it may likely turn into a hot button issue in terms of how much we as government want to regulate in terms of what's being built in the community.
So how do we want to flesh that out, guys?
Well, let me, Crystal, do we have any sample color palettes based on architectural design that we could share with the commission?
We didn't prepare any as part of the presentation. I would ask John if he has any that might be available. Oh, John, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
Maybe that's wise. I would say that every single paint company basically publishes colors that they make available that are based upon styles of architecture, exactly in the way that Aldo Schindler was mentioning. I think it's a relatively easy thing to present within the design guidelines context as opposed to the design standards context, some ranges of colors, and then basically simply say, choose from these, or come in with some type of palette that's from a documentable source. Because if you just simply put in to an internet server, mid-century modern color, you're going to get the color palettes right there. So I feel like as long as the applicant can basically either use something from a company that clearly is identified with that style, or bring something in that they can show to staff that is documentable, and, you know, in terms of where the source is, that staff basically can checklist it, as was mentioned earlier, and that if staff can't checklist it, then I think it basically becomes something that goes to the planning director or goes through the appeal process that's in the design guidelines. I think that the vast majority of people will be able to feel comfortable with being sent in a direction and just choosing something that they feel is right. And like, if you think about Spanish actually, there are whites, creams, there are basically terracotta colors. So it's not like you are forced to do white if you're doing a Spanish building. I mean, if you look at the Dunn Edwards does good versions of this, Benjamin Moore has good versions of this, Sherwin-Williams has good versions of this. So I think there's a relatively straightforward way of doing this and making it work within the system that we proposed, and give staff some anchoring that isn't going to make them look like they're being arbitrary.
Yeah, commissioners, I think John makes two really good points. Number one is you're going to have defined color palettes based on architectural design. So there's your guardrails. You're going to have that. And number two, the guidance that staff provides is going to be appealable. So if somebody truly wants that pink Spanish home, they'll be in front of the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission will have its guidelines to reference as well. So there's an option for the Planning Commission to allow this to proceed based on a foundation that exists within existing architectural designs and the related color palettes that go with it.
Okay, so am I correct in hearing that if we make it maybe a little more flexibility, if we make it part of the guideline as opposed to a requirement?
I think what I was saying is that your standards are basically shalls and are fairly rigid, but if you place them within the design guidelines, there's a bit more flexibility for staff to work creatively with applicants. And if they can't work with applicants, to go through this appeal process that Crystal mentioned, which is written into the guidelines right now, which basically simply requires that the planning director make findings, and the findings are there within the design guidelines as presented to you this evening. And if the planning director gets appealed, it becomes to you and you end up being the decision maker. But I think that we've tried to set up a system where we give people very clear guidance based upon existing character delineators. It allows staff and the applicant to understand those. It provides an opportunity for the planning or community development director or their delegee to basically serve as a appeal source. And then in the case where, as Aldo said, somebody really just wants to do it, they come to you. But I think the guardrails are so much more substantial than what you have now. It also, I think, gives staff two layers of protection, because you have a very professional staff. They're not going to reject something on a purely arbitrary basis. They're going to have to make some fairly strong decisions to not go along and get along on something like that. So I don't know, color is always very controversial, as all of you have mentioned, and you do have to be a little bit sensitive about it, because it can turn into, there are a lot of cases where it's turned into sort of useless arguments with people, because remember, it's reversible also. So, but it can get people very upset, for sure.
Okay. Vice Chair Owens, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. So I have confidence that staff, would check it at the counter, and like John just mentioned, if the applicant was persistent, then there's the process. It would go through certainly under our noses at some point, if that's how the process, was served. So I think it's just simply a small amount of language. Maybe Crystal can help us with that. That would put it into the recommendation and not to the requirement, like you had suggested, and we can move forward and probably pass, this item tonight.
I agree with that. How about Commissioner Ortiz?
I'll agree with that too. Recommendation, if Crystal can let us know how the recommendation will be stated. So
Okay, so what I was looking at is section 6 of the design guidelines. That's where we have our checklist. Section G1, character and style. We do have one criterion there, and they're required to meet that as part of the checklist. We'll add another item, we'll renumber and create a new G2. And the language proposed for this location is that proposed building colors must be consistent with chosen architectural style. And that way it allows staff to work with them in regard to, we can have just samples that are not incorporated into the guidelines themselves. Or if they want to choose a different color, they would have to show us what reference material they're using for the selected color. And that checkbox item would have to be met.
Great. Commissioner Montoya, do you have any thoughts on it?
I like that. I like what you proposed, Crystal. And if we do it that way, I think that's good.
Yeah. I do too. You have that language, Crystal?
Yes. So the new language will read, proposed building colors must be consistent with chosen architectural style, and reference material must be provided to confirm architectural style. Color is consistent with architectural style.
Great. With that, do we have any more discussion? Anybody wants to be heard, or is there a motion?
I'll make the motion. And the motion would be to approve the zone text amendment as modified in the section identified. That's my motion.
And adopt the resolution.
and I second.
Okay, we got a first and a second. Secretary Kavanaugh, may you please take a roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Ortiz,
Aye.
Commissioner Montoya,
Aye.
Vice Chair Owens,
Aye.
and Chair Duarte.
Aye.
And the motion passes to approve PLN 18-00106 zone text amendment with the added language as provided by the city planner.
Okay, great. Now, moving on to non-agenda public comments. This portion of the agenda provides an opportunity for the public to address the Planning Commission on items within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission and not listed on the agenda. It is requested but not required that you state your name, address, and subject matter upon which you wish to speak. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. Pursuant to the Brown Act, no discussion or action other than a brief response, referral to the city planning staff, or schedule for a subsequent agenda shall be taken by the Planning Commission on any issue brought forth under this section. Before we begin the non-agenda public comment period, I'd like to remind members of the public participating telephonically that the city meeting rules contained in the Downey Municipal Code prohibit any conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting, even if you're participating telephonically. Each speaker shall have 3 minutes to address the commission on issues that are within the commission's jurisdiction. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding non-agenda public comments only may now call our teleconference line at 562-299-6622. For those who have submitted comments via email, your comments will be read into the record and no further public comment via teleconference will be permitted. Secretary Kavanaugh, may I have the first speaker on the phone?
Chair Duarte, there are no calls for non-agenda public comments nor emails.
Okay, we will now close the non-agenda public comment section. Moving on to the consent calendar items. Items in this section will be voted on in one motion unless a commissioner or citizen requests separate actions. Anyone wishing to discuss a consent calendar item shall be recognized by the chairman, state name, address, and agenda item number. Further, any consent calendar items removed from the agenda will be considered by the commission following the public hearing items. Before we begin the consent calendar comment period, I'd like to again remind members of the public participating telephonically that the city's meeting rules contained in the Downey Municipal Code prohibit any conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting, even if you're participating telephonically. Each speaker shall have 3 minutes to address the commission on consent calendar items. Members of the public wishing to address the planning commission regarding consent calendar items only may now call our teleconference line at 562-299-6622. For those who submitted comments via email, your comments will be read into the record and no further public comment via teleconference will be permitted. Secretary Canwell, may I have the first speaker on the phone?
Chair Duarte, there are no calls nor emails for public comment on the consent calendar.
Okay, we will now close the consent calendar public comments. We do have one item on here. Does any commissioner have any questions on the item or any comments? Vice Chair Owens?
None. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Montoya?
No comments.
Commissioner Ortiz?
No comments.
Okay, is there a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
And I second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Secretary Cameron, may you please take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Ortiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Montoya?
Aye.
Vice Chair Owens?
Aye.
And Chair Duarte?
Aye.
And the motion passes with all in favor to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, great. Now moving on to other business. Does any commissioner have any items they would like to speak about? Commissioner Montoya?
Nothing to discuss, Chairman. Thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Nothing to report. Thank you, Chair.
Vice Chair Owens?
I have none as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I have none as well. Staff member comments. Director Schindler, do you have any staff comments?
Thank you, Chair Duarte. I just want to make another shout out. We have ample funding left in our rental payment assistance program for our residential community. We pay for 3 months rent for anybody that's been negatively affected economically by COVID. So we ask that you help us spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this meeting is adjourned at 7:27 p.m. Hey guys.